Nintendo just aired their Nintendo Direkt for the Switch 2, which will release at the 5th of June 2025. I want to focus on what we know so far and discuss some of those information for a moment. Some interesting information also got buried a bit. My name is Chris, aka The Philosopher's Games, or TPH Games as my little games channel here is called. And let us just start with some of the basic information. Also, disclaimer, I'm primarily a PC gamer and still I try to look at everything as rational and neutral as I can. As said a moment ago, the Switch 2 will release at the 5th of June 2025, and of course it is still a handheld and a home console in one device, so this functionality has not changed. The price of the new console was not revealed during the Nintendo Direkt, which was strange, but later on the website, and so we have an idea how much it costs. It comes in a normal version, I guess, and in a bundled version, where it's bundled with Mario Kart World, which is an exclusive for the Switch 2 and will be available on launch. And the normal version is €470 or 396 pounds or $450. With the bundle it's €510, 430 pounds or $500. So relatively expensive for a lot of people, but I would like to discuss the price a bit later. Interestingly, there's a Japanese language only version for the Japanese market, and there it is 50,000 yen, which is roughly $340 or €310. So the price is much closer to the old Switch. A reason for that might be that the yen is currently not that strong, and still Japan is, I guess, one of the most important markets for Nintendo. So there they potentially try to balance things out a little bit. On the hardware side of things, the handheld screen supports 120Hz and 1080p, also HDR10, and it seems also VRR, which is great. However, it is not an OLED screen, which surprised a lot of people, but I guess Nintendo wants to release an OLED version of the Switch 2 in some years, as they did with the Switch, so that's maybe for some people not the biggest surprise here, but it would have been great if it is an OLED screen. Further, it weighs 401 gram without Joy-Cons, with Joy-Cons 534 grams. So in comparison, the old Switch was without Joy-Cons 297 grams or 398 grams with Joy-Cons. A Steam Deck LCD in comparison is 669 grams, so it got round about 100 grams heavier than the old Switch. In the dock, the console supports resolutions up to 4K at 60 FPS via HDMI. We will see how well that works at the end. The docking station has a dedicated cooler and a wired LAN port, which I guess is a huge improvement over the old Switch. The device, of course, also supports Wi-Fi 6. It has 256GB storage, and you can add to that by using a more expensive microSD Express card, up to 2TB it seems. Nintendo gives an estimate for battery life of 2 to 6.5 hours and a charging time of 3 hours. The handheld has 2 USB-C ports and the dock has 2 USB 2.0 ports, which seems a bit lacking. However, what are you going to connect to it that requires more than 2.0, to be honest? In this context, they also showed a webcam, which is available for purchase as an accessory, and I think that was like €60 or something like that, though it exists in an interesting Piranha Plant version, which is I think €40 or something. That was kind of interesting and cute, to be honest. However, according to the website, you can connect other webcams as well, so it seems there will be alternatives for that might be cheaper. The webcam feature will be used for their new online chat and video chat functionality. There is a microphone in the handheld itself, so for voice chat you can use this. If you want to have full video chat functionality, you need to get a webcam for the Nintendo Switch 2. What I find a bit unfortunate is that you need the paid Nintendo Online subscription to use this voice chat or video chat functionality, though they said after launch it will be free for everyone for some time. I don't know how long that is, maybe a month or something, and people can try it out in this period. Would be great if it would be free for everyone all the time, I guess, but here we are. Then they also reworked the Joy-Cons a little bit. You can now use them as a mouse, and that's actually an interesting feature depending on the game, considering that Civilization 7 will be on the Switch too. So that's, I guess, a cool idea. Then also they made the sticks bigger, and they now connect to the handheld using magnets. So that might be a bit more comfortable connecting them in this regard. I hope we won't have problems with Joy-Con drift again. That would be horrible. I hope Nintendo kind of learned their lesson there, but who knows. The next detail from the technical spec page is very interesting. It says it uses a custom NVIDIA processor, CPU/GPU, and this connects to backwards compatibility. And it's a complex topic, it seems. According to their developer Q&A called Ask the Developer Volume 16, the Nintendo Switch 2 Part 4, it seems that the Switch and the Switch 2 are not compatible on a hardware level. Let me quote, "Does that mean that the Switch and the Switch 2 aren't compatible at a hardware level?" Sasaki, exactly. This time we decided to take on the challenge of using new technology to run Switch games. Previously, they also explained this, they basically built in the hardware of previous consoles. So there was Wii hardware in the Wii U and so on. So they were able to run those games. However, this is now different for the Switch 2, which does not include the Switch hardware. And it seems also that this custom NVIDIA processor is so different that it simply does not work with the old software and games. As a result, they had to find a different solution this time, and they did. It is not emulation, but kind of a layer that translates this in real time. And what is interesting here is that they are very transparent with this process. They have a website with 2 PDF files that show you which games aren't compatible yet. They potentially still work on it, and at some point they might get compatible, but so far those don't work. And interestingly, the number is very low if you consider how many games there are for the Switch. Like when it comes to the first-party games and the third-party games, it's something like 0.8% of games that have issues or don't work yet. So the list has some games in it, of course, but still, considering how many games there are, it's relatively short, to be honest. So roughly about 120 games are not compatible out of, I don't know, over 15,000 games. That is quite a lot. Of course, 80% of those 15,000 games are still in testing, but at least they start, and there's a further testing process going on. I think until release and beyond release, this list will improve further and further, though the number of games that are not compatible yet is actually very, very small if you look these graphs here that we can see. And there's also 2 PDF files where you can see which games those are, which games have issues, are kind of playable, and which games are not compatible. I will link this webpage in the description with the PDF documents in it and the lists, so you can check them out for yourself. But let us move on. There might be more information about the device and the hardware and so on, which we could discuss, and maybe something I have overlooked or forgotten, but this should give you a decent overview of what is going on. They also showed in this context a lot of games that might come to the Switch. I already mentioned the Mario Kart World game, the new Mario Kart for the Switch 2. And I don't know how many units the old Mario Kart sold. I think it's something ridiculous like 75 million units. A massive game for Nintendo and massively popular. Further, they also showed that Elden Ring, I'm a huge Elden Ring fan as you probably have noticed, will also come in a new tarnished edition to the Switch 2, which I found very funny. It includes the DLC and also some unique armor set, which will also be available as a DLC on other platforms. And also Cyberpunk 2077, which I'm also a huge fan of, will also come to the Nintendo Switch 2, including the DLC in this Ultimate Edition. Further, they also announced another FromSoft game, which made a lot of people's head explode, I think. I was also speechless for a moment. At the beginning, it sounded and looked a bit like Bloodborne, but it's called Duskbloods, and it seems to be an 8-player PvPvE game, What exactly is going on there and how this will play out at the end, I can't tell you. It seems definitely that Miyazaki was a bit inspired by the seamless co-op mod, so he potentially wanted to implement more multiplayer-focused stuff. It seems beyond Elden Ring Night Reign, so now we have an exclusive Switch 2 title called Duskbloods from FromSoft, which is actually very interesting. Sony did something similar with Bloodborne when their console was released, and I remember the PlayStation 4 also had kind of problems at the beginning with big console sellers, though I guess the competition also had some struggle here and there. And Bloodborne definitely was one of the big reasons for some people, especially Souls fans, to get a PlayStation. So I could imagine that this might also be interesting for some people to get a Switch 2 here in this context. Then further, it also seems Nintendo definitely wants to show we have the support of all the publisher, and also more modern games or demanding games come to our console now, which was a bit different in the past. They showed Borderlands 4, they showed FIFA, so EA Sports FC, I think it's called right now, and so on. So quite a few bigger, demanding, more popular games are also released on the Switch 2 in the future, which I think is a good sign and helps maybe to get into good competition with PlayStation and Xbox in this regard as well. And of course, they still have their unique selling point of being a handheld. That is very important. I think also Final Fantasy VII Remake comes to the Switch 2 as well, which is actually, if you look at the history of this game in regards to Nintendo, is actually kind of an interesting twist. But I guess the original was ported to the Switch in the past anyway. However, software-wise, I'm not too concerned when it comes to Nintendo. They're very creative people. They also showed a new Donkey Kong game, which looked fantastic, with this interesting destructible world approach in a 3D jump and run game. So very interesting. And we all know at some point there will be a new 3D Mario coming to it. We maybe get a new Zelda at some point. So there's definitely a lot of potential in the powerful IPs that Nintendo possesses, also including Pokemon and so on. As a result, I'm not too worried in this regard, and when the publisher also support the game and think the console is capable of running their games, then this should work out quite well. Of course, I think even the Switch now can't do wonders. It won't have the power of an PlayStation 5 or the PlayStation 5 Pro, same with the Xbox Series X and so on. It definitely is not that capable, but it needs just to be capable enough. And if the installment base is big enough, publishers will port their games if it's not too much of a hassle to do so. Let us now come back to one of the most controversial topics of this announcement, which is the pricing of the Switch 2. Now that we have almost all the information and a good overview, I think from this point it's easier to discuss, is it now worth the price? And I personally hope they would go cheaper than 500 euros, so maybe more in the lower 400 range, let's say 410 or something like that. That was kind of my hope, but unfortunately they went with a higher price, and they are now in direct competition with like a PlayStation 5 in Europe. The question is now, why is that a problem? And I think because the old Switch was just 350 euros roundabout, and this is now 120 euros more expensive. That's quite the jump, if you are honest. And I think people just hope it should have been cheaper. Though, if you compare it to, for example, other handhelds like the Steam Deck, it's still kind of in that range. The base Steam Deck with 256 gigabytes and also LCD display is 420 euros right now. If the Switch is now a bit more, the Switch 2 is now a bit more powerful than a Steam Deck, then you can definitely argue, well, the price, I guess, is kind of okayish. Of course, it would be awesome if it would be cheaper, but I think it's not completely unreasonable. However, it also puts the Switch 2 in direct competition price-wise to a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X, for example. As a result, People might argue, well, the hardware is not as powerful and so on, but is this really a reason? Because it's a completely different concept. It's not just a home console, it's also a handheld at the same time. And of course, that has always kind of a drawback in this regard. Further, at the end of the day, I think most important for these consoles is always, what can I play on them? So if you don't like Nintendo games, yeah, that's not for you, completely not. If you enjoy some Nintendo games a lot, like me, for example, the Zelda games, and also a bit of Mario here and there, then this is definitely interesting. And so I think the console price itself, even though I also wished it should have been cheaper, is still in the realm of somewhat reasonable, in my opinion. In this context, Nintendo seems also to implement, for the most part, some requirements to even pre-order the Nintendo Switch 2, I guess to prevent excessive scalping, as we have seen with other hardware, and I think that's a good move. You could also argue that this is very important for the domestic Japanese language only version of the Switch 2, so that this can't be abused from other countries there, that they abuse the regional pricing for Japan. So it's very interesting. It's a bit strange to see a region-locked console, if that makes sense, but still, I would argue it's an understandable step here. And overall, I feel that the price of the console won't be the biggest issue, especially after some time the price will go down potentially and so on. I think that's not the main problem. The main problem I see, though, is the price of the actual games. For example, if you go into the Nintendo store, you will notice that here in Central Europe, in Germany in my case, the physical copy of Mario Kart World will be 90 euros, which is absolutely insane. Like normally Switch games are like 60 euros here, and this is, as you can see, like a 50% price increase for this flagship title, which is, in my opinion, a bit too steep. Sony already got a bit of flack for increasing their prices to 80 euros or dollars or whatever, and that was also not received too well by the people. Now it gets even more expensive. Reminds me of Take-Two discussing if GTA 6 should cost 90 or even 100 euros / dollars, whatever currency you have as equivalent, and that's also pretty insane. I mean, the discussion in the industry is definitely there if these flagship titles that are very expensive to make should cost more money. Still, it feels unreasonable and a bit out of touch, to be honest. Further, we have the Switch 2 editions of Switch 1 games that re-release now for the Switch 2 and have some upgrades in them, sometimes even new content. And I've seen they are also 80 euros here, which is also quite expensive, as you can imagine, considering that it's basically mostly an old game, just some features added to it and optimized now for Switch 2, better frame rate, potentially better graphics a bit. You know, that seems to be also quite steep when it comes to the price, especially if you consider that an upgrade from the original Switch version of the game that you can also pay for might be cheaper than in this regard. But let's say the original game is 60 and now the upgrade is 80, then it might be that it's a $20 upgrade just to make it not cheaper to buy the old version of the game and then get the upgrade for cheap. I don't know exactly what the price policy will there, but it makes very little sense. Also, I looked into an electronics store homepage here in Germany, and they also have the new Donkey Kong game listed there as well, but it's listed for 80 euros, which is also very expensive, but it's less expensive than 90, also as I think the physical version. So that seems to be very strange to me that one game is 90, one is 80, the other 70. Like, why are these big price jumps in the games? The policy so far makes not that much sense. I can't imagine that it's not final, to be honest, because it's an international, experienced, massive company. I don't think that's kind of a hiccup here. So Nintendo seems to follow a new price policy here, and I hope that maybe there's enough consumer backlash for Nintendo to paddle back a bit and adjust it a little bit, but who knows? If people are willing to pay these prices, Nintendo won't change those prices as a result. I hope that there is something that can be done there. And we know Nintendo is very stubborn and they rarely give discount to their games and so on. So very curious how this works. For now, I think that might be the prizes they want to take. Curious what other big titles, let's say there is a new 3D Mario coming out, what do they want to charge for that? That will be very interesting to see, but I guess that's far off into the future. So I think everything was mostly reasonable in this presentation that we got, except for the game prices. They seem completely bonkers in my opinion, and I'm not happy with those. So that's, I guess, my biggest point of critique. Not a surprise, I think everybody is complaining about it right now, rightfully so. And maybe Nintendo hears our complaints and potentially changes something. I would not bet on it because, as said, Nintendo is very stubborn. So we will see what comes out of this. I would say this is already long enough. Thank you people for watching and see you next time. Goodbye. In case you enjoyed this video, feel free to press the like button, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment, tell me what you think about it. I know that people are unhappy with the prizes, but maybe let's talk a little bit about the other details as well. What were things that you liked? What were things that you disliked? Let me know in the comments, would be much appreciated. Again, thank you for watching and see you people next time.